called The Story of the Dixieland Jazz Band. Originally, I recommend it. He was the man. Well, let's put it this way. This picture, this actually happened. It is a dateable event, December of 1915. There was a prize fight in town between Pete Herman and Eddie Coulon. There were two big bantamweights from New Orleans. And it was a championship fight. And this guy was down here from Chicago. His name was Harry James. He had a club up in Chicago, and he heard this band playing the ballyhoo in a prize fight. And he went up to the leader after he finished, who was Jack Lane, and he said, "Man, I like your band to come to Chicago and play my club. I've never heard music like this before." And Lane said, well, what the Italians call il gran rifiuto, where fate comes knocking at the door and you don't answer. He said, "I can't, I gotta be here for Mardi Gras." Because he had this, he had a lot of bands playing under him, and they were playing for Mardi Gras parades. And he said, "But talk to Nick on the cornet." So he talked to LaRocca, and LaRocca said, "Yeah, come hear my band tonight at the Haymarket Cafe on Iberville Street," which was part of what was called the Tango Belt. So feet off from the red light district at that period. And he heard the band, hired them, they went to Chicago. 2 years later made the first jazz record in New York for Victor. The originally sang jazz band One Step and the Livery Stable Blues. They were the ones that sort of kicked off the entire movement, what became the jazz age. Now, there's a great historian named John Lukács who writes still, writes like a novelist, but he says that all history is personal. Like case in point, personal. In my case, this fellow Pete Herman, his daughter used to live next door to my Aunt Millie. We used to have coffee together, right? This fellow here, his grandson, great-grandson, plays in the symphony. Alcee Nunez, Robert Nunez. LaRocca, his son is around. He is a bandsman here. He has a band called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band. Plays at the Jazz Festival. And years ago, I had lunch with him, and we got to meet him. And this fellow on the trombone was Leon Smello. I had no connection, but anyway, that's. And of course, this is the corner of Canal and Royal. Like one goes past this place. You know, at that time, it was a big, major corner. It was like Hollywood and Vine. And that's where they were selling tickets for this prize fight. But this was the beginning of that demands of LaRocca's career. Now, the interesting thing about LaRocca is that he became, he creates what essentially was the Beatles of the early 20th century, the Dixieland Band. But when his career came to an end, he moved back to New Orleans, became a contractor, right? And he lived within 2 blocks of where he was born, 2023 Magazine Street, which is across from where used to be the Happy Hour. That's where he lived as a young man. In fact, I talked to a gent, his name was Mr. Richarm, whose mother-in-law ran the Happy Hour. And in 1914, she played the piano in the band. It was a vaudeville, neighborhood vaudeville. LaRocca came across the street and he said, Mrs. Kern, I would like you to take down this piece I've written. So he said, come on inside the theater, Nick. So they walked inside the theater. She sat down on the piano. He played it on the cornet. She wrote it down for him in notation. And he says, "Hey, that's a nice tune. What do you call it?" So I call it the Tiger Rag, right? So
that's where it started.
Well, the thing is, at his house on Constance, on the screen doors are written in wrought iron the first 2 measures of the Tiger Rag. Da 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 da.
Which became a part of the LSU.
Oh yeah, it's.
But his dad came from Sala Peruta, Sicily.
Yeah, they were Sicilians.
Yes, with a cornet as well.
Oh, I'm sure.
So it was part of the family, I guess, to play cornet.
Well, people that were there's a really interesting book came out by Sam Charters. Came out a few years ago. He died actually after it was published. Well, it's called The Trumpet Around the Corner, and it's about that kind of neighborhood music. That's what Al Rose said. He said that the jazz music was a result of New Orleans neighborhoods. That it was it was created by place.
Well, did the opera house? Did he work at the opera house?
Yeah, he was an electrician.
So
at the French Opera House.
So also heard that
heard a lot of music.
that inspired him as well. He was working at the opera house.
Well, like for instance, I was listening to a piece on the radio. This is years ago now. The German Dances of Schubert. Well, the story was that this is based on the quadrille, the Tiger Rag, which means it's like 4 separate tunes. There was another type of dance called the German, which was similar to the quadrille in that it had separate tunes that everyone danced to not at once, but in succession. Well, there are these dances that were written by Schmidt that obviously came out in about the 1820s, 1830s. And one of the dances goes dum 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 dum, which is the tiger rag,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And I would recommend you look that up. And I was shocked when I heard this over the radio. I called this friend of mine, a jazz historian. I said, "You won't believe what I just heard. The Tiger Rag by Schubert."
Now, Whirlin, did Whirlin have, with the piano and the music, Whirlins, or was it
Whirlines?
Whirlines.
Yeah, Whirlines.
What era was that? What year?
Oh, Whirlines have been around since the 1840s, late 1840s. So they provided all the. Well, I mean, I can remember it was still on Canal Street. It was a big major center. You go in there, you see all these musicians. They would either be customers or even working there.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, the Whirlines would have been right down the street from here, right here. This building here on the corner was erected by in the 1820s. It's the first granite building in the city, and it's still there. It was built by Edgar Degas' grandfather. It was called Mousson's Fort. It was built from Quincy granite. I think it's Quincy. Well, anyway, so not only is it a culture. I mean, culturally, it's a very important car.
Yes.
Thanks to Pete Herman, Nick LaRocca, Alcide Nunez, Jack Lane, that whole bunch.
Wow, so that's the corner where jazz leaves New Orleans and goes to Chicago
Yeah, exactly.
and goes worldwide.
That it right there. I recommend it to you. There should be a plaque, but of course there won't be. It needs plaques.
Yes.
But and this is the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Some of these buildings are still there. This building is still there, albeit you see it used to be there was a balcony that wrapped around it until 1915. It was blown down by the storm of 1915. That's why it's like this. But anyway,
so do you think opera inspired jazz because LaRocca was working at the opera?
No.
No.
Well, yes, and, I mean, that's a lot like the themes maybe. But I think the inspiration of jazz is essentially ragtime. Jazz is hot ragtime.
Yes.
Although it became simplified. Ragtime is a little bit more complex, in the sense that it was written down. Like Joplin writes the Maple Leaf Fracas. It's printed. Jazz music was famous for the fact that it wasn't printed. It was head music. It was something you improvise at the moment. My theory is that a lot of these bands played for prize fights, and the bands would play, for the fight, and I don't think the musicians wanted to be reading music and not seeing the fight going on at the same time, so they played head music.
Wow. Now, what about the word jazz? J-A.
Oh, that was first used by LaRocca. The story is that he was playing in this club in Chicago. And it was a late night vaudeville club, and one of these vaudeville actors jumped up on the table when they were playing. He said, "Oh boys, jazz that music, J-A-S-S," which in a 19th century definition in a dictionary I found means to make a loud noise. Right? It's a pre-existent word which has now been subsumed. If you look in Merriam-Webster today, it'll define the music. It won't define this term. And then LaRocca changed the spelling to J-A-Z-Z because he said all the kids were going around this vaudevillian shouts that out, and LaRocca says, "Oh, that's what we'll call ourselves, the jazz band." Well, the kids were going around crossing out the J, so it became the ass band. So he changed it to J-A-Z-Z. There's a lot to be said about Nick LaRocca and his contributions to this era, and to his music.
What a story.
Yeah. But I didn't make that up. That's in that book, right? The story of the Dixieland Jazz Band.